Woman has disappeared. She was visiting from China. One night she went for a walk and never came back. Her family made an emotional appeal today, and as Tim Weeks reports, police are searching for any sign of what's happened to her.
When a 47-year-old Chinese woman, Lianji Guo, went missing from Vancouver, Canada during a vacation on June 7, 2012, her husband and young son were extremely worried. Not only did she have a flight to China the following day, but also she was unable to communicate in English. Did she get lost in a new country? Or had she fallen into someone's trap? Hi, and welcome back to Mysterious 7, friends. I'm Michael, and today we're looking at a case with a crazy plot twist. But first, about 92% of you are still not subscribed to the channel. Please consider subscribing, as it motivates us to create more intriguing content for you. So, without any further ado, let's dive right into this mystery. Vancouver is a city unlike any other. Located in the lower mainland region of British Columbia, Vancouver is arguably the most beautiful city in the province with its majestic mountains, sparkling ocean, and rainforest greenery. Apart from its geographic aesthetic, Vancouver offers lucrative job opportunities and excellent education. Every year, many international students come to Vancouver to complete their studies. On June 8, 2012, the Vancouver Police Department in Canada received a desperate call from a 25-year-old Chinese exchange student, Yuan Shi Tang. The caller said that his mother, 47-year-old Lianji Guo, who was there visiting him, went missing just one day before she was supposed to return to her home country of China. She was particularly vulnerable because of her inability to speak or even understand English, her native tongue being Cantonese. Lianji and her husband Tang Juihe went to Vancouver, Canada 20 days prior to visit her son, Yuan Shi Tang, who was studying at Douglas College in Canada. They rented a B&B and made lots of plans for the three of them to spend time together as a family. Yuan was excited to show his parents around his new city. After a wonderful visit with their son, it was time for Tang Juihe and Lianji to go back home. They had a flight scheduled to China on the afternoon of June 7, 2012. According to Yuan's statement, on the morning of their flight, Yuan made his way to the rented apartment to pick up his parents to go to the airport, but his father was still sleeping. As there was still plenty of time, Yuan decided to let him sleep in and took his mother for breakfast at a restaurant. After breakfast, they returned to the B&B, where he began loading all of their luggage into his car. He could see his mother watching him from the window as he was loading the luggage. He stated he then went to a nearby mall to make a purchase. But shockingly, when he returned, his mother was nowhere to be found. Yuan woke his father up to inquire about his mother's whereabouts. Initially, they weren't all that concerned. They assumed that Lianji had just stepped outside for a minute and couldn't have been very far. After unsuccessfully trying to reach her by phone, they waited for some time, expecting her to come back. After a few hours, when she did not show up, they went to look for her. They searched around the city for quite some time with no luck. Since the flight was for that afternoon, Yuan and his father headed to the airport, thinking she may have caught a cab there. Unfortunately, she wasn't there either. As the airport announced the boarding of their flight, Tang Juihe was torn between going back home and searching for his wife. However, Yuan reassured him that it must have been a simple mix-up and that he'd be thoroughly searching for her and send her home once she was found. Tang Juihe returned home after a 13-hour flight filled with confusion and anxiety. His wife's seat beside him remained empty. Unable to find his mother, Yuan called the police the following morning. An investigation was launched immediately in an attempt to find Lianji. When they reached the scene, they did not find anything suspicious. However, police speculated that Lianji was trying to illegally stay in Canada and did not want to return home. However, this theory was filled with holes. Yuan's family ran a very successful furniture transport business, making them very well off. They had customers across the world, including the US, Europe, and Southeast Asia. While Tang Juihe visited his son often during business trips, Lianji was visiting Vancouver for the first time. She had no history of any addiction, mental instability, affairs, or known enemies. There was really no reason for her to want to illegally stay in Canada. This theory was eventually thrown out when Lianji's belongings, including her money, passport, and handbag, were discovered in Yuan's car. Fearing that she may have been abducted by someone, Yuan set out on a mission to find his mother. He handed out flyers with his mother's picture and details. He also gave interviews and held press conferences to spread awareness about his mother's disappearance in hopes of getting significant information. His father soon returned to Vancouver to assist in the investigation and search for his wife. The public, especially the Chinese community, was moved by the story of the father and son who were desperate to find their loved one. Many locals volunteered in the search efforts. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation, but for days, the search yielded no results. There were no ransom calls, which weakened the theory of kidnapping. At this point, when several days had passed with no new leads, cops were considering a much more sinister outcome. As a last resort, police began to look at this case from a different angle. They started looking closely at the family members. As they dug deeper, a strange piece of information caught their attention. Oddly, Yuan had rented an apartment in the same B&B in which his parents were staying, but failed to ever mention this to authorities. All this time, police believed Yuan was living in his own apartment and came to visit with his parents from time to time during their stay. Now it looked as though he was staying just next door to them the entire time. When police questioned Yuan regarding this, he simply said, "You didn't ask me, I didn't say." Upon further questioning as to why he rented a room in the B&B when he already had a rented apartment nearby, he justified it by saying he intended to spend as much time as possible with his parents. Although this bit of information did not prove that Yuan had anything to do with his mother's disappearance, his nonchalant attitude was enough to raise suspicion. Investigators also noticed that Yuan was also trying to downplay his English-speaking skills, avoiding some questions along the way, which also seems strange considering his 6 years of study in Canada. At this time, investigators started to look at Yuan as a person of interest. There was another anomaly in his story. He first told the police that his mother was alone and went missing from the B&B, but later changed his story and said they went to have breakfast and from there she went missing. He again changed his story later and said she was in his apartment and disappeared from there. Shocked by Yuan's lies, Tang Juihe asked him why he would do such a thing. Yuan told him that he did this to save his landlord from legal trouble since his landlord illegally divided the rent and had done him a favor by not calling the cops into his apartment. Though the excuse sounded lame, Tang Juihe wanted to put all his efforts into finding his wife instead of arguing with his son. But police started digging deeper for clues. They interrogated the tenants in the B&B in Richmond, Vancouver, and they all said that the family got along really well. They hit a dead end, unable to gather any evidence. 2 weeks later, in a press conference, Tang Juihe and Yuan said that although they could not rule out the possibility that something bad had happened, they were hopeful that Lian Ji was safe and sound and would be reunited with them soon. At that point, investigators were leaning toward homicide rather than a disappearance. With hopes of finding remains or any evidence, they beefed up their manpower and began sweeping the nearby wooded areas, but to no avail. Despite all efforts, there was practically no progress in the case. As the business back in China was falling apart, Tang Juihe had no option but to return home. Once again, he was relying on his son to keep the search for his mother alive, which Yuan promised him he would do, before persuading his father to go back. On July 20, 2012, Lian Ji's case was formally handed over to Canada's Integrated Homicide Investigation Unit. Detectives from IHIU believed from the start that Lian Ji's family members were involved in her disappearance and possible homicide. However, they were unsure whether it was Tang Juihe or Yuan Ji Tang who was the culprit. Looking at the inconsistencies in Yuan's statements, IHIU detectives zeroed in on him. When they went to search the B&B, they found traces of blood on the ceiling, walls, closet, and nightstand in the room that Yuan was previously staying in. They also found a massive spot of dried blood on the bed. The blood was taken into the lab for testing, but couldn't be determined who it belonged to. As the blood evidence alone wasn't enough, Yuan couldn't be apprehended. Detectives also wanted to search Yuan's apartment, but they did not have enough to get a search warrant, and Yuan refused to let them in without one. July 20, 2012 marked 1.5 months from Lian Ji's disappearance. On the same day, police received a call regarding the finding of a suitcase containing human remains on the beach near Harwood Island, a 6-hour drive from Vancouver. When cops reached the scene, they discovered the corpse of a middle-aged Asian woman. Looking at her clothes, police immediately thought of the missing Lianji Guo. An autopsy later confirmed this. The results suggested that she died from multiple blows to her head. In her spine, 5 steel nails marked with Chinese words were found, which was consistent with the characteristics of Lianji, as she had spinal surgery recently. When genetic tests were performed, the corpse was officially identified as 47-year-old Lianji Guo. Unfortunately, there was no surveillance cameras in the areas where her body was found, and therefore no way to know who left the suitcase on the beach. Meanwhile, RCMP took over the case and strategized to go undercover. They neither went public with the discovery nor did they inform Yuan. At the start of August 2012, an undercover female police officer of Chinese descent contacted Yuan and said she had some information about his mother. The Cantonese-speaking officer met Yuan at a local Starbucks and informed him that she had found his mother's body inside a suitcase by the sea, but she hadn't informed the police. She was willing to get rid of it if Yuan paid up. Although Yuan denied any connection to his mother's death and wanted to get away, the officer further insisted that she was going to give him 2 days to think about it. If not, she was going to the police. Yuan called her up that night to accede to her demands. In the next meeting, she introduced him to 2 more undercover cops who told him that getting rid of a body was easy enough for them, provided he gave them money. They claimed that one of their team members was dying from cancer and could be the fall guy if all the details of the murder were supplied to them. But Yuan had no money to give them, so he made a shocking proposal. He said if they killed his father, he'd inherit everything, and then he could pay them. The undercover cops agreed to his plan as well, but demanded to know the details. Yuan fell for this well-planned trap and began to tell them the entire story. Yuan was the only son of the couple, Tang Juihe and Lianji Guo from Foshan. They ran a successful business with an annual turnover of 10 million yen. Lianji's strong character was an asset to the business. However, she also had a need to control things, especially when it came to her son. She was what could be called a tiger mom. Every detail of Yuan's life, be it career planning or love life, was scrutinized by Lianji. She was responsible for Yuan's breakup with his high school sweetheart, as she had an ordinary family background. Lianji controlled the family's wealth, and she kept a tight rein on Yuan's pocket money. In 2006, then 19-year-old Yuan was sent to Canada by his parents against his will to pursue a higher education. He was to study hotel management at Douglas Community College so that he might build his own identity in Canada and extend the family business. Yuan felt lonely in a foreign country with no desire to pursue business and feeling oppressed by his mother's control. Yuan felt manipulated and coerced by their emotional abuse, and even his classmates complained about his mother. Yuan started lying to his parents, using various pretexts to obtain money, which he would spend on gambling or partying instead of studying for his degree. His grades were very poor and not suitable to pursue further education. To pay for his expenses, he worked part-time in the kitchen of a Chinese restaurant in Vancouver, despite having a student visa that did not allow him to work in Canada. He earned only $850 per month. Meanwhile, his family in China were completely unaware of his activities. In 2011, he returned to China to spend the holidays with his family. This time, he met a girl. In a very short time span, he proposed to her. His mother objected to the marriage and found a more suitable girl for him to marry, according to her standards. This upset him. After graduation, most of his classmates returned to China, and his circle of friends became smaller. He longed to return to China to reunite with his fiancée. He explained to his father that he felt imprisoned in Canada, but his father urged him to push further. His fiancée, meanwhile, became pregnant with what he believed was his child, but then underwent an abortion. This further pushed him toward the edge. In May of 2012, his parents visited him in Canada. He rented 2 B&B rooms in Richmond, one for himself and one for his parents. He explained that they could not stay at his place because it was a shared apartment. He also rented a car, claiming that he bought it. He showed his parents around Vancouver, but even then, tensions between them were building. He wanted to be free of them, free to do as he pleased with his life. At some point, Yuan found a hammer in the B&B toolbox and stashed it inside his backpack. On the morning of June 7th, upon realizing that his father had not yet woken up, Yuan spread some coins on his bed and called his mother to his room on the pretext of helping him clean it up. When Lianji knelt to clean it, he hit her on the head with the hammer. When she started struggling, he covered her head with a sheet and struck twice more to ensure she was dead. After killing his mother, his mind raced. He wondered whether he should kill his father too. However, after a few minutes, he decided not to go through with it, fearing that suspicion could fall on him if the two of them disappeared at the same time. After convincing his father to return to China, Yuan returned to the B&B to clean up his mess. After getting rid of the evidence, it was time for Yuan to get into the role of the good son. Yuan put up the facade of a concerned son and reported her missing. After he was done telling his story to the undercover officers, he reenacted the whole incident, not knowing his performance was being recorded. His secret was about to blow up in his face. At this point, investigators had more evidence than they could have ever expected. Yet they decided to take it slow and gather more evidence against Yuan to corroborate his story. It did not take long to track down the rented car with traces of blood inside. They also found evidence of burn stains and blood from the storage room of Yuan's apartment. On September 7, 2012, Yuan Zhitang was formally arrested for the murder of his mother, exactly 3 months after her disappearance. In addition to the murder charge, he faced additional charges of plotting to kill his father. Although he tried to deny everything, he eventually confessed once all the evidence was presented before him, including the video evidence he had unknowingly given undercover agents. Life turned upside down for Tang Juihe in the blink of an eye when the news broke in China about Yuan's arrest, which prompted his immediate return to Canada. He couldn't believe that his son was capable of murdering his own mother. Yuan, on the other hand, showed no remorse. He went on to say that he had no regrets about what he did. "She's been holding me back, not just controlling me a little. These are my parents and will control me for life. People are going to die. It doesn't matter if it's sooner or later." It was later discovered that Yuan had been planning to kill his parents for a long time. He waited for them to come to Canada because this country had no death penalty. He was also skeptical if Canadian police would be capable enough to solve a crime so twisted. As it turned out, he overestimated his intellect as much as he underestimated Canadian law enforcement. Shockingly, despite Yuan's horrific deeds and plotting, Tang Juihe stood by his son during the trial. He not only forgave him, but invested a lot of his fortune in Yuan's legal aid. His reasoning? He already lost his wife and couldn't afford to lose his only son, too, despite all of his wrongdoings. In one of many jail visits with Yuan, he stated, "No matter how wrong you are, I will forgive you. Your mother is gone. If you die, I don't want to live." Somehow, Tang Juihe was certain that his wife would understand his reasoning while watching over them from heaven. In court, while testifying as a prosecution witness, he begged for leniency for his son, saying that Yuan was a good man before their strict parenting ruined everything. However, the court seemed to differ, as they found him guilty after a lengthy trial. Finally, on February 2, 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada handed down the sentence of life in prison to Yuan Zhitang for the second-degree murder of his mother and attempted murder of his father, with parole eligibility after 17 years. This complex case of control and betrayal remains one of the most controversial and disheartening in recent Canadian history. In the end, the culprit faced justice, but a family was forever destroyed. Do you think Yuan Zhitang was pushed too far by his tiger parents? Or did he just use that as an excuse to murder, potentially inheriting a fortune? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.